I never feel like I deserve applause, so it's alien to me. All right, so tonight's subject is Muhammad II Fatih. He is an Ottoman Sultan, and his story is, I think it's a really interesting story, so I thought it would be a fun topic. Having said that, it's a little complicated in the sense that there's lots of moving parts, and I'm not sure as I do the talk exactly how I'm going to roll out those moving parts. But hopefully I'll make it make some sense anyway. And the reason is because there's several actors. And then, so, you know, my habit of, we need to start with background. Well, I'm going to do that, but then I need to give you the background on at least 2, maybe 3 of those actors, just so that you kind of have a sense of what's going on. So, since I only have an hour to do this, I should just start and stop giving you it's kind of like an apology. If this turns into a train wreck, I'm so sorry. All right. I think the place to start, actually, is a reminder that by the time we get to the Ottoman Empire, it starts being created in 1299. It's not an empire in 1299, but the Ottomans have carved out a state, and they're beginning to rule part of Turkey. By the time we get there, there's been a lot of turmoil in the Middle East, right? The Arab Empire collapses and is replaced by the Buyid state, which collapses and replaced by the Seljuk state. And actually, that's kind of where I wanted to start the background on this. And what ends up happening is, kind of out of nowhere, there is a new state that becomes powerful in the region. It's the Khwarezmian Empire. And I know you're thinking, wait a minute, I've never heard of the Khwarezmian Empire. It was a vassal state to the Seljuk Empire. It was a minor state. Nobody thought anything of it. It was in Khorasan. And as the Seljuks are starting to unravel, all of a sudden the Khwarezmians start to gain a lot of power. They put down the Ghurid state, they put down the remainder of the Samanid state, and then they finish off the Seljuks and they make an empire in what is today Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, and a little bit of the surrounding territory. They are more or less established as a powerful state by 1190, and their second to the last leader, but really their last leader, is a guy named Muhammad II, ironically enough. It's a different Muhammad II, though, and he is the Shah, because this is a Persian state of the Khwarezmian Empire. And Genghis Khan had sent a trade mission to set up trade. And, right, this empire is like 30 years old. It's 1220. And Muhammad II thought, I'm scared of the Mongols. I want them to be scared of me. So he imprisons the delegation and kills the Mongol that was with them and has the corpse sent back. So Genghis goes, that's not what I was expecting. And so he sends 3 men as ambassadors. And it's not, we don't actually know exactly what happened to the 3 men. There are like 15 different accounts. But it was probably something to the effect of, one of the accounts that I think might be reasonable is he killed 2 of them, cut out the tongue of the 3rd guy, handed the heads of the 2 he had killed to the 3rd guy and sent him back. And so Genghis Khan said, that's it, you're destroyed. He invades the Khwarezmian Empire and obliterates it, conquers it. That's what starts the Mongol invasions of the Middle East. And by 1258, the Mongols destroy Baghdad. And shortly afterwards, they capture Damascus. And their goal at that point is to conquer North Africa. They meet the Egyptian army at Ain Jalut in Palestine. And the Egyptians are outnumbered. And the Mongols have never been defeated in battle. It's 1260. And the Egyptians do the unthinkable and defeat the Mongols for the first time in history. Ironically, because history loves these little things. I don't even know how this happens. Ironically, the leader of the Egyptian army, the Mamluk army, is a guy named Saif ad-Din Qutuz. Seyf-ad-din Qutuz, the ruler of Egypt, was Persian. He was a slave. He had, in fact, been part of the Mamluk army. The Mamluk army was a slave army. He rose up through the ranks and ends up ruling Egypt. He was from the Khwarezmian royal family, and as a child got sold into slavery when Genghis Khan destroyed the empire he was a part of, and then ends up leading the Egyptian army in the first Mongol defeat. The Mongols are so stunned because they've never tasted defeat before. They don't even know what to do with it. They're like, you know what? We don't need North Africa, and they stop. And they actually kind of put a kind of a pause on things. By this point, when I say pause on things, they've probably killed about 20 million people. So I don't want you to think like they were kind of soft and this is kind of a gentle event. The Mongols were on a psychotic rampage. And they stop, convert to Islam, and start ruling the territories they'd captured. Not all the Mongols convert to Islam, but the ones in the Middle East do. And some of them start to have second thoughts, right? Like they destroyed the House of Wisdom in Baghdad when they destroyed it, and they're like, oh, that might have been a mistake. And they start thinking about art and culture and philosophy after all the destruction. The guy, by the way, who does Baghdad is Hulagu Khan. He decides it was a mistake, actually, after he destroys Baghdad. He becomes a Buddhist and ends up going to some monastery in India and spends the rest of his life, going om, to repent for killing 800,000 people and destroying the greatest city on the planet at the time. They're like, yeah, I feel like that's not actually going to make up for it, but cool that you found peace. The reason all this matters is because there's going to be a second Mongol event. Well, for our purposes, there's way more than 2 Mongol events, but for our purposes, there's a second Mongol event. A Mongol leader named Timur from Central Asia starts to build his own little empire in Central Asia, and little by little, he starts conquering westward. And he has that bloodthirsty streak. He is not a kind guy. When he captures Esfahan, for example, he orders the mass execution of the population, and I want to say they killed 60,000 people, something in that order, and then they just decapitated everybody and made skull pyramids. Well, they were artists. I mean, their canvas was body parts, and they just made skull pyramids. At one point, Timur felt like he needed his men to show how ruthless and cruel and sadistic they were, so he ordered every single soldier to bring back 2 heads. Well, some of the soldiers were like, I'm going to bring back 20. The problem was there were a bunch of soldiers, after they killed the prisoners and the slaves, that only had 1 head. And they knew going back to Timur with 1 head was not okay. So a bunch of soldiers went to the baggage train, found their wives, cut their heads off, and now they had 2 heads. Like, this is that era. Timur goes all the way into central Turkey. Okay, so before he gets there, there was a state. It was the Sultanate of Rome. It actually was a vassal state to the Seljuk Empire. It was a Turkish state that had as its expressed goal the conquest of the Roman Empire, hence its name, the Sultanate of Rome, also pronounced the Sultanate of Rum. And their goal was to make Constantinople the capital of this new Muslim Roman Empire. They never pulled it off, but they did adopt the Roman flag. The Roman flag was a red flag with a gold, yellow-headed eagle, double-headed eagle, yellow-headed, in the center. They had a blue flag with a white double-headed eagle in the center. And when the Seljuk Empire went down, they were still going. They were still operating. But as the Roman Empire got weaker and weaker, chunks of the Roman Empire got conquered by other Turks, for example, the Ottomans. In 1299, the Ottomans carve off a piece of Anatolia, and so they're not actually with the Sultanate of Rome. By the time Timur gets there, the bubonic plague, the really bad outbreak, it's actually shocking how many bubonic plague outbreaks we've had over the centuries. But there are some that are much worse than others. The 1347, 1348, 49 outbreak was the really bad one. Estimates are that it may have killed as many as 60% of the entire Middle Eastern population and as much as 40% of Europe's population. There's all sorts of theories about why it went away, why it stopped. They're all wrong. And so stop looking to those. It stopped because it stopped. That's the best we've got. But we do know it actually changed human DNA and changed the way our immune system works. And one of the things that happened as a consequence is we're now more vulnerable to coronaviruses. Isn't that cool? Because history affects us. An event that took place 700 years ago just made an outbreak much worse than it would have been had that not happened. And you think, oh, we should pay attention to those things. Anyway, so, by the way we know this, looking at cemeteries before the bubonic plague, and then after the bubonic plague, and then looking at the DNA, and then seeing how our DNA was changed by it. So, it's really cool studies. In any case, there's been a population decrease in the Roman Empire, in Anatolia, throughout the Middle East, and in this population decrease, the Sultanate of Rome didn't do especially well. So it's hanging on to power, but it can't control the other Turks in what is today Turkey. And then Timur shows up. By that point, the Ottomans had actually carved off a huge chunk of what is today Western Turkey, and they owned a huge piece of northern Greece and all of Bulgaria and what is today called North Macedonia. In other words, they were on both sides of the Sea of Marmara. They were on both sides of the Dardanelles and Bosporus. Their empire, in fact, was about 50% Europe, 50% Asia. They owned Ankara, and so when Timur shows up, he puts Ankara under siege in 1402. He captures the city, he captures the Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan, and one of his sons, and takes them back to Samarkand. The other four sons escape. They escape the defeat, and then they plunge into a civil war because each one of them wants to become the next sultan. And that civil war lasts until 1413. It takes 11 years to sort that civil war out. It actually gets sorted out 6 years after Timur dies. So in other words, even though Timur really disrupted the Ottoman Empire, he damaged it in a serious way, it still takes years after his death for them to get back on their feet. The guy who takes over is Muhammad I. Muhammad I only rules for 7 years, but during that time period, he stabilizes the Ottoman Empire, reconquers some of the land that they lost because of Timur, and as a result, he'll make it so that his son, Murad II, will have a relatively stable empire to rule. Murad becomes emperor at age 17, so he's probably a little too young to rule. And he rules for 23 years, and then he decides in 1444 that he's done. He's sick of being the Sultan. He's not interested anymore. He feels like his health is coming apart a little bit. And so he abdicates and puts his son in charge. His son is Muhammad II, the one that I'm going to specifically talk about tonight. He was 12. So all of a sudden, there's a 12-year-old Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. I'm going to freeze the story there because I want to now get the other side story going a little bit. I should probably talk about the Roman Empire and the condition it's in because they're a major player in this story. The Kingdom of Hungary is the other major player, so I'll talk about both of them. So by this point, there's not much left of the Roman Empire. So when I say Roman Empire, obviously, I don't mean the glory days when the Romans were committing genocide. They're way past that ability right now. They are desperately holding on for dear life. All they own in this moment is a piece of Thrace. So think of the piece of Europe that Turkey still owns today, right? The Roman Empire owned about a quarter of that. So they didn't even own all of that. They owned about a quarter of it. They owned a stretch of land on the Black Sea in the northeast corner of Turkey. That's probably about maybe 7% the land size of Turkey today. It's not tiny, but it's tiny. And then they owned the southernmost part of Greece, about 40% of Greece, not including the islands, because a bunch of the islands in the Aegean actually didn't even belong to the Roman Empire. It belonged to the Genovese and the Venetians, because they just started conquering them and taking them. That's it. So the Roman Empire is 3 small pieces of land that are separated by the Ottoman Empire, which is completely surrounding them in Constantinople, and then on their border with Trebizond, and then on their border with Morea, Morea being the southern part of Greece. On top of this, the Roman Empire, so in a way this is kind of a tragic story, right? In a way it's a good story. The Roman Empire, by the time it finally does go down, from the starting of the Roman city-state in 753 BC, I'll get it out eventually, from that moment to its collapse, it had 2,205 years of history. There aren't many places, in fact there are none, on the planet that had continuous rule from one, as a single state for 22 centuries. Right? The Persians had the Medians, then the Hachemenides, then the Seleucids, then they had the Parthians, and then the Sasanians, right? But they were each a separate new state. Whereas the Romans, it was the Roman city-state, which was a kingdom, turned into a republic, turned it into an empire. It was consistent. The only thing that happened is its capital got changed. So it's a long time that it's been around, which is, in my mind, completely uncomprehendable. Like, I don't know how they did that, but they did. It's one of the reasons I think why so many people are obsessed with Roman history is like, how did you last? What is that? If we could figure out how to duplicate that. And then you look at Italy today and you're like, well, that's clearly not the answer. Of course, Italy's only existed since 1860. So the United States is older than Italy. Something to kind of remember. Like, you got to give the Italian state some time to kind of grow into it. It's still very young. It's a baby. It's a baby. Not even 2 full centuries. Come on, give it a shot. A chance. All right, so the Romans had multiple times where they went crashing down and then came back, crashing down, came back, crashing down. And that's what they're thinking. We're in a down period, but surely we'll come back like we did before. And even recently for their history that had happened. Towards the end of the 10th century, Basil II, the Roman emperor, actually began to reconquer territory and push the Turks and the Arabs back. He actually got the Roman Empire to reoccupy part of Syria. Like, he managed to rebuild part of the... And then Romanus the Fourth is defeated at Manzikert by the Turks and is taken into captivity. He's the first Roman emperor ever captured alive. It's a disaster. And the Romans go back into decline. And then they're starting to recover a little bit, and then they get attacked by the Fourth Crusade. A blind Venetian doge named Enrico Dandolo. With a name like Dandolo, you have to do something crazy. Convinces everybody to do a Fourth Crusade, and then he gets to Constantinople and goes, why are we going to the Middle East? Let's just sack Rome. And he does. And they conquer Rome and take it over, and they rule it for 7 decades until the Romans can finally regain control of Rome. And now they're limping along because they're trying to recover from being sacked by the Venetians. It's a mess. So by the time they get to this point where it's 1444, there's doubt they're going to make it. The city of Constantinople in the 6th century probably had 1 million people. In 1444, it maybe had 60,000 people left. Its population has dramatically shrunk. There's another actor I need to introduce, and his name is John Hunyadi. So the king of Hungary was a guy named Sigismund. He was a German. And he wasn't just the king of Hungary, he also was the king of Bohemia, and he was the Holy Roman Emperor. And so he had this huge chunk of Germany and Italy and Hungary and Bohemia that he ruled. And as rulers are apt to do, he dies, and he's replaced by a guy named Albert. Albert married Sigismund's daughter, Elizabeth. And then he dies just 2 years later, and then his son is born a few months later. So his son's name is Ladislav, and he is the fifth. So Vladislav is the king of Poland. He is asked to come rule Hungary because this kid, who's the heir, is 0 years old, right? He can't rule. He was literally born after his dad died. Like, this is a mess. So Vladislav III, the king of Poland, comes and takes the title Ladislav the first for Hungary. I'm going to keep calling him Vladislav III because I feel like it'll get confusing if I use his other name. So it's not because I'm trying to be a jerk. It'll make it a little bit less confusing. So what ends up happening now is Hungary ends up in a little bit of a civil war because there's two factions now, and one faction is fighting for the king of Poland, the other faction is fighting for Albert's 0-year-old son. And this guy named John Hunyadi had been working his way up the ranks. He was a military guy, he wasn't nobility, he starts getting given land because he's a successful leader, and he decides that he's going to go with Vladislav III. And so he is actually working for this Polish king. The reason he matters is because, in a way, he becomes the de facto ruler of Hungary. He decides in 1444, that year that I paused our Ottoman story, to go on a series of campaigns against the Ottoman Empire. His goal is to push the Ottoman Empire back, put them on the defensive, regain some lost territory. He wins some battles, but none of them are especially shocking or amazing. But they mattered. They do push the Ottoman Empire back. What then happens is Murad II, the Ottoman Sultan, goes to him and says, let's do a peace deal. We need a breather, you need a breather, you've lost a lot of troops doing this. Let's do a peace deal. And he goes, yeah, I'd love to. And they sign a peace treaty. What they didn't know was Vladislav III, who by this point is definitely in charge. It's no longer a question of who's in charge anymore. He had sworn an oath to not honor the peace deal. So he lets the peace deal get signed. Right after it gets signed, that's when Murad II abdicates, handing power over to his son, and that's when Vladislav III decides he's going to launch another attack. They do it in November 1444. They wait weeks from the signing of the peace treaty to do the attack, and their attack is the city of Varna. Varna is today in Bulgaria on the coast. Their thinking is if they can capture Varna, it will set the Ottoman Empire back really badly, and the Ottomans won't be in a position to recover anytime soon. They take about 24,000 men. About 1/3 of the army was Serbs. So the Serbian state at this moment is in a really weird space. So it was created by the Roman Empire. So officially, it was called the despotate. So the ruler of the Serbian state is the despot. It's not a great title, but and his name was Durad Brankovic. So officially, he's a vassal of the Roman Empire. But by this point, the Roman Empire is in such awful shape. That's not real. That's just on paper. In reality, he's either a vassal of the Ottoman Empire or the Kingdom of Hungary, and we don't know, and he doesn't either. He's trying to figure that out. But he thinks, okay, Christian Muslim, I'm going to go with the Christian. And he joins, and they go attack Varna. What then happens is, as the army is coming, Muhammad II, the 12-year-old Sultan, writes a letter to his dad. And he probably started it, "Dear Dad." Dad. And he said, "If I'm the Sultan," oh, sorry, it started the other way. "If you're the Sultan, I demand you come take command of your armies. If I'm the Sultan, I'm ordering you to come take command of my armies." And so he pulls his dad out of retirement. His dad takes command of the army, and he leads the Ottoman Empire to a brutal victory at Varna. It's a catastrophe for the Crusaders. It's to the point where Crusaders are dying everywhere, including Vladislav III. He dies in the battle. Brankovic manages to escape, and Hunyadi managed to escape. And one of the reasons why it was such a disaster is Murad II went to the Genovese and the Venetians and said, "Can I pay you to help move my men around using your ships?" And they were like, "But we'd be doing this against fellow Christians." And he went, "Here's the gold." And they went, yeah, thanks, we got you. And as a result, effectively, the Ottoman army ambushes the Crusaders in a spot they didn't expect to be attacked in, and it's a catastrophe. Brankovic goes back to Serbia, but he's in trouble now because, right, he picked the wrong side in that equation. And now Hunyadi is in a position where King of Hungary is dead. The guy that everybody had accepted, the King of Poland, that guy is dead. So their option is a 4-year-old. And that's it. That's what they're going to have. They have a 4-year-old king now that they're going to serve. Hunyadi becomes the regent. And Ladislaw the fifth becomes his mother becomes the person who's officially the regent. She dies a year later. It's a mess. There's a power struggle. The Holy Roman Emperor gets involved. He takes physical custody of the boy. It's Frederick III. And now, effectively, Hunyadi is ruling Hungary because there's literally nobody to tell him what to do. But he's not the king. He's just officially the regent. He's trying to figure out how to recover from the disaster of the Battle of Varna in 1444. And in the meantime, Murad II, after 2 years of letting his son rule, goes, "Okay, this isn't working. I thought by the time you were 14, you'd have figured this out." And so he takes over and becomes Sultan again. So he does a second term. He will do 5 years as Sultan, and then he dies. He died a young man. I think he's 46. So he didn't last very long. So all of a sudden, before he dies, I need to tell you what happened. So Hunyadi comes up with a new army and decides to attack again. It's 1448. And as he's marching, he's heading towards Kosovo. So Kosovo had broken away from the Ottoman Empire and was ruling itself. And any attempt the Ottomans had made to get back into Kosovo weren't working. Albania had broken away and they owned Kosovo. So they're marching through Kosovo because their goal is to get into what is today North Macedonia. And as they're coming through, they're marching through Serbia, they expect Brankovic to switch sides and come over, and he's like, "No, I've learned my lesson. I'm a vassal of the Ottoman Empire." And so they decide, okay, scorched earth, and they start pillaging Serbia on the way. For the record, Brankovic, years earlier, had been forced to give Belgrade to Hungary. So like the best Serbian city is under Hungarian rule, and the Hungarians are just treating him badly in this moment. And he's like, all right. They sack Serbia, get into Kosovo, and Murad II meets him with an army and defeats them again. It's another catastrophe. Hunyadi has to escape through Serbia. Brankovic captures him, arrests him, and is actually thinking of turning him over to Murad II. And his friends talk him out of it. And they tell him, you should just release him, but make him pay. So I don't remember how many florins. It's like 100,000 florins or something like that he has to pay. It's gold coins. And then on top of that, he had to give up some of the land, some of the Serbian land, not Belgrade, but some of the Serbian land around there. that the Serbs had given up. And they make a deal, and they let Hunyadi go. So from 48 to 51, 1448 to 1451, it's a little bit of calm. Murad II dies. When he dies, his son, his 17-year-old son, takes over. The European powers figure a few things. One, there's no way Muhammad II, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say Mehmed II. And the reason is because that's how the Turks pronounced it then. I know there's been this, some Turks now say Mehmet with a T, but at the time it was Mehmed, which, by the way, is still spelled the same exact way, right? So it's just a different way of pronouncing the name Muhammad. So Mehmed II is making peace overtures. The European powers are thinking he's 17. His first rule when he was 12, 13, and 14 was awful. What's he going to do? And so they sort of discount him. The person who doesn't discount him is a guy named Constantine the 11th. Constantine the 11th is the Roman emperor. He's panicking because he can see the writing on the wall. He can read Mehmet's mind. Mehmet has one goal the day he takes office. He is going to conquer Constantinople and make it his capital. He's that guy. And so he begins working on it from day one. That's all he thinks about. I'm going to take Constantinople. I'm going to take Constantinople. And of course, all the other European powers, even Hungary, are like, he's not going to do anything. Constantine the 11th, well, that's a lot of Constantines, who was the emperor in Constantinople. So I think that's a good thing to have. Constantine the 11th, it starts sending out aid requests to other European powers, like he sends a request to Venice. And Venice goes, yeah, we'll think about it. And they start debating it. And, you know, the dukes are getting together, and they're like, I don't know, should we do this, should we not? And it's like 2 years of debating. They do finally send a fleet in April of 1453. It arrives too late. So maybe don't hesitate too much is the lesson there. But a few ships show up. Ultimately, Venice actually did send 8 ships. The Genovese show up. They had 5 ships. There's a ship from Aragon. There's a ship from Provence. Another ship from Ancona. The Romans still had 10 ships in their navy. Mehmed II has like 200 ships. So it's not well matched. But the navy doesn't have to have a full-fledged fight because they had a massive chain. And they floated the chain on logs, and they pulled this massive chain across the Golden Horn to stop the Ottoman navy from being able to get into the Golden Horn to attack Constantinople from the north. And then they parked their 20 or so ships back behind that. 26 ships, I think they had all total. So they're seriously outmatched, but it's okay because they've got this chain. And there was no way for the Ottoman navy to breach the chain. They tried, it just wasn't, it was too strong. So they're stuck. Anyway, in 1452, so before this, Mehmed is so serious about this that he's sitting down and talking to his guys, and he goes, I want to bring cannon. Big cannon. Really big cannon. Like 760 millimeter cannons that are 8 meters long and can lob a 600 kilogram projectile. 1.6 kilometers. I'm serious, they built this thing. Are the roads going to hold this? And of course, everybody's like, there's no way. It's going to take a team of like 400 men to pull this thing. There's no way the roads are built for this. And so for a year, he just has like 250 masons and carpenters walking around the countryside, finding all the bridges that need to be repaired and built up, and they just start building them up. And this, of course, is alarming Constantine the 11th. In the meantime, he builds a fort on the European side of the Bosporus. His grandfather had actually built a fort on the Asian side of the Bosporus. They're now aimed at each other. and he named the fort Throat Blocker. So you can see what its expressed goal with the Bosporus was. You shall not pass. So as he's doing these things, Constantine XI's alarm is going higher and higher, but he's got a problem. In 1054, the Eastern Church and the Western Church, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, excommunicated each other in the Great Schism. In 1182, the Roman emperor decided he didn't like that there were so many Catholics living in Constantinople. It was about 1/7 Catholic. And so he actually allowed a massacre to take place, and a bunch of Venetians and Genovese were killed, and that created a lot of bad blood. In 1204, Venice gets its vengeance by conquering Constantinople and sacking the city and ruling it for seven decades. So this back and forth has set things into a place where it's going to be really hard for there to be cooperation. So at that point, Constantine XI is trying to figure out what he can do. One of the things he has is probably the best fortified city in human history. The walls were high and they were thick. The Romans weren't messing around when they fortified Constantinople. The coastline is fortified, the land connection is fortified, these walls are serious, and there's interior walls, so that in the event of a breach on the exterior wall, you could drop back to interior positions and fight from there. The interior walls were not built for that reason, they were just older walls, but just the fact that they existed meant that there was a backup line. And this city had been considered a city that nobody could conquer. Obviously, the Venetians did, but that's because they gained entry first and then backstabbed the Romans, right? It was betrayal. It wasn't a true siege like what these guys are planning to do. So he knows he has that. A guy shows up. His name is Orban. Isn't that cool? He's probably Hungarian. There's some speculation that he might not have been, but I'm going to go with he was a Hungarian. And he says, I can make you the biggest cannon the world has ever seen. He's telling this to Constantine XI. And Constantine goes, yeah, that'd be amazing. And Orban says, I'm calling it Basilica. It's huge. This thing's a monster. And Constantine XI goes, how much? And Orban tells him the number, and Constantine says, that's like more than my entire revenue for a whole year. I can't afford this. Orban goes, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And he leaves. He goes to Mehmed II, and he says, I've got this design for this huge cannon. Like, it can probably knock down really big, thick walls. Do you want to buy it? And Mehmed II goes, how much? And Orban tells him the price, and he goes, done. Get started. They begin building big cannons. There's another one called Suruka that's being built by the Turks. And then Orban's building Basilica. And their goal is they're just going to knock holes in the Constantinople walls. But then they also are going to bring about 60, 70 other cannon also. Just, it's going to take a lot of cannonballs to knock down these walls, so you want to get to grinding. So at that point, as preparations are happening, the Ottoman army in 1452 is slowly moving into place. And you can just imagine what's going on in the minds of the Romans as they're getting reports. Another unit moved closer, another unit moved, it must have been just unnerving. Having said this, the Romans thought they had a chance. They thought they had a real chance. That wall, they thought might just be enough. And they'd been through so much for so many centuries, they thought, surely we can pull this one out. In 1453, on April 6, the Ottoman army arrives at Constantinople. They have Serbs who are Christian. They have Greeks in their army who are also Christian. In other words, there's this huge Christian army, or a huge portion of the army that's Christian. Their army was about 60 or so thousand men, all total. They brought in men from Anatolia, they brought in men from Bulgaria. Like, this is a huge, massive army, multi-religious, massive army. One of the groups, the soldiers that they have, are Bashi Bazouks, which I really desperately want to call bazookies, but I've been told I'm not allowed to. The Bashi Bazouks. I mean, I feel like it fits really well. Also, there's somebody named David who will really like that. So the Bashi Bazouks were meant to be the crazy Turks. They were the guys who they would go charging into battle, screaming at the top of their lungs. If they didn't kill anybody, it didn't matter. Their goal was to just disrupt the enemy lines. They were like the berserkers that the Vikings used, but the Turkish version of this. The Turks also had janissaries. Janissary literally meant new soldier. The Turks had changed the way soldiers fought. They had innovated and created a new type of soldier in the janissary. And they're their elite units. They're the guys that they're going to hold, right, and be careful with because they're going to need to use them at the right moment. They get into place, and they begin firing on the walls with their cannon. So Orban, there's multiple accounts of this. I'm going to go with the dramatic one just because it's so exciting. Orban was apparently chained to Basilica. I'm not sure it's true, but it's just such good imagery. I feel like that account was really cool. It took 3 hours to load this monster. So they're not even part because there's a 600-kilogram stone they're trying to jam into the tube. So they're taking 6 hours to load this thing. When they would fire it, it would create so much heat that it was literally melting on the inside, and then fissures were forming. So they realized they couldn't let it cool down naturally. They needed to slow down how rapidly it cooled. So they would pour hot oil into the barrel after they fired it to let the oil keep it hot for a longer period of time to keep this thing from breaking apart, because it's literally starting to fissure. They're firing it day after day after day, and Orban is also in charge of other cannon that they're firing, but this is like his baby. Because he's in charge of other cannon, he probably wasn't actually chained to Basilica, but it's still such good imagery. Basilica, when it would fire, had a giant kickback, and it would go flying backwards. When everything worked right, sometimes it would kick to the right or the left, and it frequently was killing the cannoneers that were too close, because it would just come flying over and smack them. And so, like, men are dying firing this thing. It's this horrible thing to fire. Because it takes 3 hours to reload, the Romans just run over and repair the hole. And then they fire, make a new hole, and then the Romans go repair that hole while it's taking 3 hours to load this stupid thing. Also, it had no accuracy, so you're just lucky when it hit the wall. It was just frequently flying into the city and smashing somebody's home, which is useless. They don't need it to do that. They need it to knock the wall down. So it wasn't really great. Sometimes technology doesn't solve your problems, it turns out. So as they're grinding the city and the Romans are repairing the wall and it's not working, Mehmed decides, okay, let's attack. So he launches a storming event where they're going to try and breach the wall with ladders. It's a disaster. So I told you there were 60,000 Ottomans. There's about 10,000 Romans. It's probably about 7,000 or so actual Romans and about 3,000 foreign volunteers. So they attacked the walls. The Romans didn't have enough men, honestly, to man the walls. But because the walls are so impenetrable, they massacre those Turks. Thousands die. Mehmed does another attack a few days later. It's another disaster. The Turks are just dying in front of the wall. He's starting to really get annoyed. And then four Genovese ships slip past the Turkish Navy and actually deliver supplies. So now Mehmed decides that he's going to punish the admiral. He strips him of all his rank and sends him into exile. He had him flogged too. And there's a weird twist to this. Across the Golden Horn, there was a town called Pera, also sometimes called Galata. And the area is Galata, the town is Pera, but people frequently call the town also Galata. It wasn't part of the Roman Empire. It was officially part of Genoa. It was given to the Genovese after the Fourth Crusade because the Genovese helped the Romans get back on their feet, and it was a gift. It was Constantinople's suburb. So technically, the Genovese were neutral, so there was technically this neutral little town right next to Constantinople, and so the Genovese were smuggling supplies and using their neutrality. This was really annoying Mehmed II, but at the same time, he liked the Genovese because for the right amount of money, they would help anybody. They were really good that way. So as this is going on, they're trying to figure out what to do. Mehmed comes up with a plan. What if you can get the Ottoman Navy inside the Golden Horn? And of course, his men are like, there's no way to get through the chain, that stupid chain. It's just driving us crazy. So he goes, here's what we're going to do. He orders the Navy to cut logs in half and then grease them. They stick them on the side of the hill, the Galata Hill, on the backside of the town of Pera. And they make a ramp that goes up the hill, and then they made a ramp that goes down the hill, and they carried the ships, they dragged the ships over the grease logs and dropped them down into the other side, the Golden Horn, and all of a sudden the Romans are like, what is this? It had never happened before. Okay, there was a prophecy that an emperor with the name of a prophet would capture Constantinople for the Muslims. The first person to try to capture Constantinople was Muawiyah, the fifth Khalifa. He fails. He failed because a Syrian refugee invented the flamethrower. This is why you should always let Syrian refugees into your country, because they will invent things for you. They're amazing. The Romans actually set up flamethrowers on their ships, lowered the chain. They had it back then too, right? Centuries earlier. They lowered the chain, they came out. The Arab Navy was bigger and better, had more Marines. So the Arab Navy's like, what are they doing? It's like a suicide run. Once we sink the Roman Navy, there's nothing to stop us. This is it. So the Arab Navy comes out, and as they're about to engage in basically melee, right, they're going to pull up alongside each other and board each other's ships, the Romans just open up with the flamethrowers and burn the Navy, the Arab Navy, to the sea level. And that's how Constantinople doesn't get conquered under Muawiyah. And then Sulaiman, the Umayyad Khalifa, a few Khalifas later, puts 719 is the year in my head, double check that if you're writing a paper. He puts Constantinople under siege again. The Roman Navy lowers the chain. They come out. The Arab Navy goes, what are they doing? This is suicide. Charges them. And the Romans open up with the flamethrowers and destroys their Arab fleet a second time. And went, what did they do? We didn't think it would work a second time. Oh, they don't read history. That's how that happened. How did they do it a second time? You would think you'd be so traumatized from the first time that the second time would be not. It's like when you burn your hand on a pan for the first time. You're like, oh, I'll never do that again. That's awful. And then people are putting toothpaste on it like that's going to do something. What I need is painkiller, not toothpaste. Anyway, nope. Didn't learn the second time. Anyway, this is the third time. And the guy's name is Mehmed. So, if the prophecy is going to work, this would be a really good opportunity. Sulaiman, another prophet, could have worked then, couldn't have worked with Muawiyah, right? Because there's no Muawiyah prophet. So, it had to either be Sulaiman or Mehmed. All right, so he gets in there. The Romans come out with their flamethrowers, but the Ottomans were prepared. They don't rush the Romans. They just wait. And the Romans can't get too close because they keep getting hit by artillery. And so the Ottomans just keep them at bay. and don't charge them like fools. And it was like, oh, those guys apparently did read history and knew the Romans had flamethrowers. Isn't that cool, though? You're sitting around one day and you're like, what can I invent to save Constantinople from falling? You know what I'd love to be able to do? Put flame on that guy over there. Wouldn't it be neat if I had some way to lob flame on him? And I'm going to figure this out. It's an engineering task that if we spent a little bit more time on things like, why didn't they invent the hot air balloon? That'd have been cool. Like, why was it the 1800s when we finally went, what if I put hot air in a balloon and then put people in a basket? What could I do with that? Like, less time trying to figure out how to kill each other and more time trying to figure out how to look at landscapes from up high. Just a thought. So, it's April 22nd. The Ottoman Navy is actually in the Golden Horn. The Romans are tearing their hair out because they're not falling for the flamethrower trick for a third time. And they don't know what to do. But the Ottomans also don't know what to do either because they can't rush that side of the city because there's flamethrower ships waiting to zap them. So it's like a stalemate. But it does mean that the Genovese can't smuggle supplies in anymore. That's done. So at least that's been taken care of. The days go by, the Ottomans do a third attempt to take the walls, thousands dead. They can't do it. They don't know what to do. The siege continues. It's May 25th. Now, this isn't a long siege for siege lengths, right? It's April 6th to May 25th. It's a month and 19 days. We're not talking about an incredibly long period of time for a siege. But at some point, the city's going to have to break. And so, everything they've been doing up until now hasn't worked. So they have a conference to talk about it. And some of the Turkish advisors are telling Mehmed, let's just pull out. Let's let them have it. He puts out a peace offer to Constantine XI. He says, one option that we have is you become the governor of Morea, and you give me Constantinople. And Constantine's like, I'll give you more tribute. And so it's like, okay, I guess we're just going to have to fight. So a group of Ottomans are telling him, let's walk away. We've already lost thousands of men. We just didn't do it. We're the third failed attempt. And he says, no, we're going to do this. We're going to do one more push, one more big push. I'm going to put everything into it. Everybody we have, even the Bashi bazooks, we're going to go for broke. The emperor had put a guy named Justinian, I can't remember how the Italians say Justinian, Justinianus, Justinian. Anyway, there was a guy named Justinian, we'll just anglicize this, he was Genovese. They had put him in charge of the most delicate part of the wall, the part of the wall that if the Turks were going to get through, it was there. It was the oldest part of the wall. They had done some repairs to it to try to modernize it, but it was dangerous. It was a dangerous spot. And they put him there because he was the most capable military leader that they had. So the Genovese are holding this spot. Isn't Genoa's role really weird? Oh, by the way, there are 600 Turks fighting for the Roman Empire, just so we're clear. So when I told you, the lines are really blurry. This isn't strictly a Muslim-Christian thing. This is way blurrier than something like that. This is a power move by one empire to recreate itself. So, on the 27th, final preparations are made. On May 28th, Mehmed tells his men, all you're going to do today is pray as much as you want and chill. Eat a good meal, rest, take care of yourself, make sure your armor is in good shape, whatever you like to do. You like to sharpen a sword before battle, whatever it is, because we're going. We're going tomorrow, May 29th, the whole Ottoman army attacks. It's insane. The first wave are the Christians. The Serbs, the Greeks, the Bulgarians, they go first. They start to make a break in certain places, and they actually manage to get into the city, and the Romans push them right back out. And then come sort of the second-line Turkish soldiers, the guys from Anatolia, and they go, and there's some Bashi bazooks in there just to try to break the line up, and they actually manage to get in to the city a second time, and the Genovese general gets wounded. They haul him off the battlefield. Genovese morale tanks at the worst possible moment. They should have just left the general there wounded so that his men wouldn't break. They break. Mehmed pulls in the Janissaries and they charge through that hole. And once the Janissaries are inside the city, there's nothing the Romans can do. It's over. At that point, the Venetians start running for the shore because they're like, oh, we're just going to get in ships and get out of here. So the Venetians are running. The Greek soldiers think, oh my God, my family. They start running to their homes because they're like, I got to somehow defend my family. The Genovese are running for the ships. It's chaos. The Catalonians, the Aragonese, they're like, no, we're standing our ground. And they fight to the death. The prisoners are executed afterwards. The city falls. By the way, the Genovese and the Venetians escape with some refugees. The estimates are that about 4,500 defenders die out of the 10,000. So it's about 45%, which is really high. The estimate is that about 60,000, sorry, is that right? 40,000 Turks die. It's about 67% of the Turkish army that dies. This is a bloodbath. People at the time said there was so much blood, it looked like the kind of water you get after a rain. At that point, the Turks don't turn on the civilian population and start massacring them, because I'm saying this because it needs to be said, because that's pretty traditional for a conquering army to do. They do begin plundering the city. And then they start rounding up the population and separating them out based on how much they think they can get for them in the slave markets. The estimate is of the 60,000 inhabitants, probably about 40,000 were sold into slavery. And then the Turks, as they're pillaging the city, pillage it for several days. There's lots of charges of brutality and cruelty. Most of those were actually generated as propaganda against the Turks. So, and it's hard to know what happened and what didn't happen. I don't want to get into those weeds, but we do know that they sold a huge portion of the population into slavery. We also know they didn't massacre the civilian population. We also know they plundered the city, and we also know that Mehmed, after they plundered the city, went, oh my God, what did we just do to my capital? Why did we do this? He moves his capital in, and within a few years, the city has more or less recovered economically. It's about 80,000 people population. It was 60,000 when the Romans were ruling it, so it's recovering. It's heading back towards being this big commercial center. And he then begins to clean up house. I'm out of time, so I just want to tell you a little piece, because I've got this John Hunyadi running around and this Brankovic running around. So Brankovic and John Hunyadi end up working together one more time. It's 1456, and Mehmed decides he's going to put down the Serbs, and he goes into a battle against them, and they fight one big last battle, and John Hunyadi and Brankovic die, and one of them didn't die in the battle. He died late, but he died later, like a little bit later, and Serbia survives the battle. It's still intact, but it just lost its leader, and the Hungarians just lost their leader. His son, John Hunyadi's son, becomes the next regent, because, right, the king is still only 16. The king decides he doesn't like the son. He has him executed. And then the next year, the king is in Prague. He dies mysteriously at age 17. Poison? No. We've dug up his bones and tested for poison. Apparently, he wasn't poisoned, but it feels like it should have been. Anyway, we don't know. Bubonic plague or leukemia, I think, are the two top explanations for his death. In any case, Hungary needs a new king, and they're trying to figure it out. They decide Matthias Hunyadi, who changes his name to Matthias Corvinus, Matthias the Raven, would be a great guy. So John Hunyadi's son, younger son, becomes the next king of Hungary. And so in a really weird way, Hunyadi sort of pulled this whole thing off. There's a tragedy in my story in that there was a whole piece I wanted to get into, but I just ran out of time. And I knew that this was a possibility, but I have to mention him. So one of the people that was supposed to come into the story right about now was a guy named Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad Dracula. He's Vlad III. He was raised in the Sultan's court and spoke fluent Turkish without an accent. He was trained as a janissary with his brother Radu. And as a result, he sort of grew up with Mehmed. He will try to take over Wallachia 3 times. In his second time, he actually ruled Wallachia for 6 years. He turns on the Ottoman Turks, and he crosses the Danube River and attacks Ottoman territory. He walks up to a fort, and in perfect Turkish says, "You guys need to open the door. We're Turks." They open the door, they go in, they massacre the city, and he starts massacring. He got the name Tepes. Tepes means impaler. He would just slaughter whole populations. He would impale them. He was just a horrible guy. He's Dracula. In Hungarian, I'm probably getting this wrong. In Hungarian, it means son of the dragon. His father was Vlad Dracul, which is Vlad the dragon. In Romanian, Dracula is the devil. So his name probably made him a little bit nastier than he should have been. He kills Christians, he kills Muslims, he kills Germans, he kills Hungarians and Romanians, Bulgarians. He doesn't care. He's impaling people, he's impaling Serbs. He just goes on this massacring spree. He's eventually arrested, put in prison, he's eventually released, gets back into charge, and it lasts for 1.5 years, and he's finally killed in battle. And that's what happened to Dracula. And I just felt like I had to bring Dracula into this, because it would have been like a real tragedy if I didn't. I'm pretty sure I would have gotten lots of nasty comments. Anyway, all right, thanks. You've been a fantastic audience, and have a good rest of your evening.